Hi, I'm Boomerang, and you are watching a show about video games, because there are not many of those on the internet. Okay, to be fair, it won't be just video games. The show is kind of like, well, have you ever had a friend who really likes to talk a lot? You get them talking on a subject and they light up and go off like a firework, and then 2 hours later you're sick of hearing about it, and then you make up an excuse to go away? Yeah, that's me. I am that friend. I am sorry. But hey, I found a way around it. I think a lot, and rather than write it down in a notebook and leave it on my bookshelf like I normally do, I've decided that I'm going to make these videos and just rant about my thoughts on, well, whatever I want, really. Which is mostly going to be video games, but I am open to suggestions. And hey, unlike real life, if you get sick of listening to me, you can just click off the video and I won't even realize. You don't even need to make up an excuse or say something hurtful to get me to stop talking. But I am sure some of you will just do that anyway. But hey, you know what? I'm just glad to be talking to one person. Okay, that's a start. That's not bad. Oh, wait, no, now they're gone. Cool. Anyway, they say that variety is the spice of life. But I am really bad at choosing subjects to be interested in that are interesting to anybody other than me. I usually describe how my brain works like a big wheel that has a bunch of subjects written on it, and I randomly spin it like once or twice a month, and that's how I decide what to get fixated on. So I bought a real wheel, and here it is. This is the Boomerang Wheel of Niche Intrigue. The plan is, every episode I will spin this wheel, and whatever subject it lands on will be what I rant about for the next however many minutes. It really depends on how much I have to say. Which actually might be a lot. It really just depends on how much I have to say and depending on what subject there is, so your mileage may vary. But who knows? Without further ado, and without ranting any more about ranting than I already have, let's spin the wheel and find out what we're going to be talking about for the next however many minutes. Fallout 4 Survival. Okay, cool. I have a lot to say on this, but before I get into it, I guess I should talk about how I got into Fallout. The year is 2010. Bad memes, good video games, and the Xbox Dark Ages just started, and I am 13 years old. I spent all my time on Xbox Live, and I just downloaded some Fallout 3 gameplay videos from the marketplace. Badass. Alright, let's check out the comments. Oh my god, I feel so old all of a sudden. But, existential dread aside, for at least this episode, I was really captured by this universe that I was seeing for the first time. It was bleak, but had this strange contrasting happy-go-lucky atmosphere, and I just needed to try it. So, because my mom was cool, that Christmas she got me Red Dead Redemption, Mass Effect 2, and Fallout 3 Game of the Year. I remember popping it in, and what happened next really blew me away. When I first walked out of that vault, it felt like my mind expanded. This world was so much bigger than I could have known, and honestly, regardless of what you think about Fallout 3, it still holds a very special place in my heart. Every day after school, I spent hours exploring the Capital Wasteland, listening to the music and soaking in the atmosphere and characters. It was amazing. And yes, for a 13-year-old, this game was a little... Okay, it was incredibly violent, but that just made it better. Okay, enough about Fallout 3. It'll have its own video. The year is now 2011, and I got Fallout New Vegas. It was enough to keep my addiction going, and I actually consider Fallout New Vegas to be a much better game, but I still have a lot of nostalgia for 3. But I don't have enough nostalgia to not mention the fact that Fallout New Vegas does have better plot, characters, gameplay, and role-playing. Emphasis on the role-playing because immersion turned out to be the most important factor for me playing Fallout. I really loved getting lost in these worlds and meeting these characters and listening to the music. It kind of distracted me from my crappy home life, and even though my life is much better than it was back then, it remains a really important factor into whether or not I'm going to keep playing a video game. And you guessed it, just like Fallout 3, I intend on making a full-length video for Fallout New Vegas. It really deserves it, but I think that is just enough background for me to talk about the next game. Fast forward to the year 2015. Well, 2016 if you want to get technical. After waiting almost a year with the Pip-Boy edition for the Xbox that I didn't have, I finally moved in with a roommate who had an Xbox One, and I finally got to play the game I'd been wanting for years. And after a few months, they eventually released modding into the Xbox version, and that made the game even better. Back then, I had a lot of free time, and Fallout 4 and settlement building easily spent most of it. And along with a lot of improvements, I ended up feeling pretty conflicted about this game, even though it was one of my favorites for that year, and I spent a lot of time playing it, and I mean a lot. I still ended up having some pretty complicated love-hate feelings towards Fallout 4, and this video is going to address them. So I'm going to ramble about what I love, what I hate, any interesting thoughts I might have about this game that I've spent so much time with. And while I could be doing something much more productive, this is a lot cheaper than therapy, and, well, I'm having fun, so let's just get into it. For me, a big part of Fallout is its atmosphere, because I don't think anything else impacts immersion quite as much. Fallout 3, I think, had an excellent atmosphere, even though it was kind of green. Fallout 4 kind of opted for this brown, gray, blue mix, and I wasn't really a huge fan. The Capital Wasteland in Fallout 3 felt extremely bleak and very post-apocalyptic, whereas the Commonwealth kind of felt like it lost something in translation. It's not less apocalyptic or anything, but it just doesn't feel the same. I usually chalk this up to the fact that Boston was only hit by one nuke, it seems, whereas DC was completely annihilated. And honestly, the Glowing Sea area resembles Fallout 3's Capital Wasteland a lot more than any other area on the map, and maybe that was the point. Downtown DC was a radioactive war zone of rubble and destroyed buildings and felt claustrophobic and intense, kind of like DC is in real life. Whereas Boston was pretty maze-like in specific areas. Looking at you, good neighbor. The only thing I was really worried about being in downtown Boston was if my game would crash, because it started to chug pretty hard. That was my only worry until I started playing survival mode. Then I had a lot more problems, but you know what? We'll talk about that later. Also, side note, forests in Fallout 4 look a little too much like forests in my area during the winter, and I wouldn't describe this place as apocalyptic, despite the fact that it is really shitty. Which brings up another point. In Fallout 4, most settlements you run into naturally are just little podunk sheds in the middle of nowhere with some dude tilling the dirt, and then he gets raided and murdered by super mutants, and then you have to help him, and then you get to have this place to yourself. But the locations where these settlements are pretty random and just seem like they're just trying to fill a quota. The settlements in Fallout 3 kind of made sense. Like Erifu, for example. It's built on half-destroyed highway thing, and that means that all traffic is bottlenecked to the bottom. That's actually not too bad of an idea. I mean, assuming the thing doesn't collapse, which, you know, if it stood up for 200 years, it probably won't. Compare that to the settlement you can build at Jamaica Plain. Just a half-destroyed building when there's a bunch of other buildings nearby that would probably make better settlements. The exception to this rule is Megaton, and I keep seeing that video that says Megaton is stupid. You know what? I'm gonna go watch that real quick. Yep, all those are really good points, and you know what? It made me think of something else. Shantytowns like Erifu or Megaton make sense in my mind in the context of the Capital Wasteland. The Capital Wasteland was hit probably harder than any other place in the United States, barring other major cities like LA or New York. That turns DC into much more of a radioactive desert than the literal desert of the Mojave Wasteland. And while the Capital Wasteland was completely destroyed, there are very few buildings standing that would make safe houses, especially in the downtown area where there are radiation and super mutants and raiders and Talon Company mercs. It just doesn't make any sense to live there when you can make a small town just outside of the city area. And you'll notice in Fallout New Vegas, people reincorporate and use old buildings and don't really build many shanty towns unless they're forced to. And that makes sense, since there's not a lot of radiation around the area of New Vegas, and these buildings are perfectly good, I mean, for the most part anyway. Which is why it's really confusing in Fallout 4. While yes, there are dangerous buildings around New Vegas that need to be cleared out that have kept settlers away, if you actually do the work of clearing out these buildings, why would you spend your time building shanty towns with junk gates when you're about 100 feet from a fortified military building? It just doesn't make any sense to me. Or, better yet, why would you make a town in an old, destroyed suburban area when literally up the hill there is an empty vault that you could live in? Hello, settler. I just cleared out that building full of ghouls that was giving you guys so much trouble. I don't know how, there was only 3 of them.
Man, that is great news. We've been talking. We decided to join the Minutemen. We need to stick together, and we need help building the settlement out here.
Oh, well, the building I cleared out, it's like 200 feet over there, and it's empty now. Like, I just cleared it out by myself. You could probably just move all your stuff over there.
Nope. It's your responsibility to build us a town in the middle of this field using scrap metal and wood that is only available to us in our immediate area.
But that doesn't make any sense.
Oh, by the way, forgot to mention, we actually don't have any food, water, or beds, so you better get to that or we're gonna start complaining nonstop until you fix it.
You don't... What? You don't have anything? How the heck did you even survive before it got here? How are you even considered a settlement?
Just so you know, people have been complaining about the bed situation.
All jokes aside, I'm kind of losing structure on how I should talk about everything I want to talk about, so let's set up a system here. I play Fallout 4 in survival mode, which means you have to eat, sleep, treat infections, and also you cannot fast travel and you have to save through beds, so you have to walk everywhere. So, to be true to that experience, I'm going to start walking from one end to the other, and we're just going to talk about subjects as they come up. And we're off, and... Wait, what is that? Well, that's a bad omen. I'm just gonna kill them so they don't come around to kill us later on. There we go. So our first stop is Sanctuary Hills, and I'm actually really excited because I get to show off what I've built and also talk about my favorite mod. Well, one of my favorite mods at least. Sim Settlements 2. It is pretty hefty and changes a lot of things. I mean, just look at this. This is Sanctuary Hills right after a fresh start. Just empty, pretty bleak, and not a lot of options when it comes to where you want houses to be and whatnot. And this is what my settlement looks like with Sim Settlements 2 installed. I place these plots and the NPCs build their own houses, and honestly, it looks better than anything I can do myself. Also, it completely changes the dynamic of how settlements work, which is really, really useful and immersive for survival mode. They can even build shops that you can buy stuff at. How cool is that? You can even get expansions to add more types of plots and land, and it's so cool. It really enhances immersion, even though it is a little buggy at times. But honestly, I don't think I can play without it at this point. It's one of those golden mods that is so good, it makes you wonder why they didn't make the game like this in the first place. And I've seen some pretty amazing settlement builds online, but honestly, for people like me who are bad at building, this mod's a real blessing because I can make towns that feel so much more alive and authentic and unique without having to put 100 to 200 hours into fine-tuning all the details. And while we're on the topic, Old World Radio and Atomic Radio add hundreds of hours of radio plays and Fallout-themed music into the game through many, many radio stations, and it's actually pretty awesome because as much as I like the music in Fallout 4, it can get a little old after 500 hours, and adding this many radio stations to listen to, I haven't listened to all of it even now. It's so cool because it's so much more immersive, which is a pretty big deal for me, so this easily fits into the category of mod gold. You can even place the radios on the ground and help fill out the world with some extra music and atmosphere. Like, this town has tumbleweed tunes playing everywhere, so it helps build a nice ambience to the whole town that's unique from all the others. And honestly, there's been so much work that's been put into these radio stations that it's almost worth its own 45-minute video, but we have a lot of other things to talk about, so let's continue with our journey and talk about things as they appear. Alright, and we're off. No fast traveling. Let's talk about fast travel a little bit. I don't really like it very much. I think it can kind of ruin immersion for me. I mean, you spend more time looking at a loading screen than actually playing the game. I mean, at least technically. I'm not talking about things like using a carriage in Skyrim or a train in Red Dead 2. Those are fine because they don't actually violate immersion at all. Here's what I mean. Anything that makes me have to not think like my character would think can ruin immersion. Taking a carriage is fine because that would make sense, but just pointing at a place on your map and blacking out and then reappearing at that place is a little bit weird. I mean, I get it from a gameplay perspective, but it's a lot more fun to me if I have to plan out my journeys, making sure I have all the things I need for a trip, which is even more important in Fallout 4 Survival. See, in survival mode, you actually need to have food and water on you, otherwise you can dehydrate and really have some severe debuffs. Whereas if you have these settlements built up everywhere, you can actually use them as little stations to refill your food, ammo, water, and get some sleep, which will also allow you to save the game. Oh, hey, look at that. That's Jake from the Sim Settlements mod. You know, I had a lot more footage of that saved, and then it all got deleted, so I can't talk about the mod as in-depth as I'd like to, so we'll talk about it some more some other time. I mean, I don't want to commit to making another video since I've already committed to making 2 videos in this video alone, but you get my point. What was I talking about again? Oh, right. Survival mechanics. Yeah, beds in Fallout 4 Survival are kind of like bonfires in Dark Souls. And trust me, I know I'm not the first person to make that comparison, but everybody agreed a long time ago, apparently, that difficult equals Dark Souls. And you know what, I know that I'm probably in the minority when it comes to fast travel, since most people would hate to have a game with no fast traveling, especially like Fallout. People just don't have the time or the patience for that these days. I know sometimes I don't. But if I have to plan a trip around where my nearest developed settlement is in relation to my destination, knowing areas to avoid and making sure I'm packed up enough for the journey with enough extra room in case I run into any good loot, armor, or weapons, when I do all of that, I end up thinking a lot more like a person would in this world as opposed to a person who is playing a video game. You know, at least a little bit. You know, I actually like minimal HUD elements for the same reason. If I have to focus on the world around me and not on the words and symbols on the corner of my screen, I'm paying more attention to the world, and in turn, I get more immersed. To be clear, I'm completely okay with HUD elements and them being in games, but I like to be able to turn them off or have them fade when not in use. Back in the day when I actually played multiplayer games on a regular basis, I really enjoyed hardcore modes that forced you to have no HUD and no minimap, and you had to really focus on the world and listen for audio cues and pay a lot more closer attention. It was a lot more intense, and I got a lot more immersed and a lot more into it. You know, now that I'm actually looking at this settlement I've built, it looks more like a prison than anything else. And a lot of the stuff's not spawning in yet, so that's cool. Here we are at Starlight. Sim Settlements allows you to create markets like this, so that way you can actually not have to go to Diamond City all the time. I know there's stands in the game before, but this all looks a lot cooler. And hey, look at this! The inside of people's houses is actually pretty unique and changes over time and depends on the different houses you build. Very, very cool. Alright, enough show and tell. Hey, look at that, it spawned in. That's nice. So where were we? We were gonna... Wait a minute. Ah, I knew it. I misspelled Starlight on the sign. You know what, I guess that still works. Alright, let's keep going, and I forgot to save my game. Alright, here we go. Cool. Alright, now we can go. But I think I forgot what I was about to talk about. I'm sure it'll come to me. Long walks like this in Fallout 4 become pretty tense when you can only save your game by stopping at beds. The game becomes a lot more tense, and your decisions seem to carry a lot more weight. It's not an Iron Man mode, but it'll do. And hey, if you like listening to podcasts, this is a pretty good way of doing it. You'll do a lot of walking, and for most people I know that's boring, but I don't know, it helps to draw me into the game a little bit more because I get to familiarize myself with these areas very, very well, and random encounters become a lot more interesting. Trust me, I'm sure we're going to see a few in the future. Like 15 minutes later, look at that! Robots versus super mutants. That's pretty neat. You guys have fun down there. I'm more of an observer when it comes to stuff like this. Let's get a little closer, though. Let's get the suppressed 45 to be sneaky.
That sound, what is it?
Okay, sneaky won't work. Suppressed weapons are a lifesaver. Because in survival mode, gunfights end pretty quick and guns do a lot more damage. See? Look at that. Bullets tend to kill things. That's the point. And that includes you, so you can die pretty quick. Hey, look at that! Legendary weapon! As long as it's not a sentinel knife, you know, I'm happy. Where was I? Oh, right. Bullets do damage, a lot more, and you can die pretty quickly, especially early on in the game, so you gotta keep your head down and use the element of surprise, kinda like how you would in real life. Hey, look at this place. This place isn't in the game normally. This is Sim Settlements 2 stuff. You know, I had a lot of footage of this massive gunfight here that was really awesome and really exciting that my computer was stupid or I was stupid and got deleted somehow. You know, usually I have a lot more mods than this, believe it or not. But my first playthrough, I just kept adding mod after mod after mod until my game was so unstable I couldn't play it anymore and I lost the save. Hindsight being 2020, I'm not using as many mods this time. Here are the ones that I'm using right now. It's not as many as I'd like, but hey, you know what? Better safe than sorry. Besides, I have enough mods for the time being. Sim Settlements 2 is really big, and you know what? I don't feel like... What? Hey, who's shooting? Is it you? What is...
Commonwealth.
Oh, there's dogs attacking the settlement and interrupting my recording. Well, that's nothing new. This little turd likes to interrupt me like 8 times every time I record. Moving right along, I guess we should talk about some mods and the ones I like to use the most. Well, we've got Fallout New Vegas items, that one's pretty cool. Or we can talk about player housing mods. This is Sanctuary Hot Springs by user Sympathy. I think it's one of the best ones out there. It's highly customizable, very spacious, and very lore friendly, which is a plus. During my first playthrough of survival mode, I used the Bridge Wall Bunker mod, and that one worked very, very well. I ended up using Hot Springs since it's connected to my own supply lines, and having to leave the bunker constantly to resupply was getting kind of annoying. Whoa, okay. You know what? I think it's time for us to talk about Fallout 4's combat. Fallout 4 feels a lot better than the previous games, and combat's one of the biggest improvements that I think everybody can agree on. Oh, let's just get away from... If you're paying attention, you'll notice I'm using an M1 Garand, which usually isn't in the game. Just let me... There we go. This is the M1 Garand mod by user AsXAs. I think it's how you say it. Anyway, the M1 is awesome. It showed up in Fallout New Vegas as the battle rifle, or this machine, and it was one of my favorite weapons in that. It packs a lot of punch, iconic, historical. Look at that guy, yeah. That's about the right response to getting shot by 30-06. Other than just, dropping dead. And that sound. Man, I love that sound. Probably a little too much because when I had the chance, I ended up making a pretty poor financial decision. Yep. I bought an authentic World War II M1 Garand. Because, come on. General Patton said that the M1 was the greatest battle implement ever devised. So when I got the chance to actually own one, I could not pass it up. And honestly, the fact that it's a gun doesn't really matter much. It's just such an interesting piece of history to me. I'm happy to report that this mod actually treats the rifle pretty respectfully. It's got a lot of power, good model, good sound, good animation, and even though the hand doesn't fit perfectly on the PC version of the mod, it works so well I can't complain. And another cool fact about the... Oh, right. Guess I should keep going on with the walk and talking about other things. If you want to see videos about guns and video games, go watch Ahoy. His videos are better. Man, that gunfight was actually pretty fun. One thing I really enjoy about Fallout 4 Survival is that it plays man versus bullet with a reasonable degree of accuracy. Of course there's a lot of other things that are very unrealistic about this game, but the extra tension is nice. I don't have it installed right now, but the NPC Travels mod is actually really useful for making unique things like that happening all the time. That way you actually run into people walking around and it's not more organic, otherwise you just kind of run into people at specific spots where random encounters are pre-programmed to happen, which can be pretty boring, but trust me, the game will still find ways to surprise you. Even without the extra help of the mod, but trust me, it helps. Okay, I'm gonna change this song real quick. Not a huge fan. That's better. Man, you see, it's really nice having extra radio stations so you don't have to listen to Diamond City Radio all the time. I guess anything's better than having to... Oh, hello. I'm pretty sure this is one of those predetermined areas where you can anticipate whether or not enemies are gonna show up. But it's been a while and I've kind of forgotten where they are for the most part anyway, so this is a nice little surprise. I know the industry was kind of bored with cover-based shooters, but there's something about having to run from cover to cover while having to take little tiny pot shots at enemies that I really, really enjoy. Well, only when it's done well. Man, look at my health. It's going down quick. It's moments like this when you get to appreciate how intense the gameplay can be, especially when you haven't saved in a while. When I had a lot more mods, I actually got a mod that got rid of that little cash register sound that you get anytime you get kills. I thought it was more interesting to kill something and not know whether it was completely dead unless you checked yourself. See, if I didn't have the M1, that would be pretty useful. And immediately after this, I was attacked by a bunch of synths, so, that was nice. I actually love when this sort of thing happens. It adds a lot to the game and makes it a lot more unpredictable and interesting. And yep, who could have guessed? More enemies start attacking me as soon as I start looting those synth bodies. While they're not doing a lot of damage to me immediately, you can see that I almost kind of panic when they start to get me into a corner like this because they can kill you a lot faster than you'd expect, even though sometimes they don't. It all adds up and makes the game feel a lot more intense knowing that you can lose a lot of progress if you don't save your game. If you run into enemies like this, they could kill you quickly and you can lose legendary weapons and they're not going to spawn again unless you get very, very, very lucky. I think it's worth mentioning that, honestly, I haven't played Fallout 4 in a long time and I was picking the save back up just to make this video. And while for the most part I love this game, there's no way I would keep playing it even today because there wasn't enough mod content to really keep me going, and you can only see this map so many times before it gets very, very old. But hey, like I said earlier, your mileage may vary. There are still people who really, really enjoy this game, and I'm one of them, but I've moved on to other games. One game I play to scratch that itch is The Long Dark. It's pretty good when it comes to survival, but if I want to play something more zombie-based, I tend to play State of Decay 2, and I really enjoy that. Or, if I'm really masochistic, I'll even play Project Zomboid because deep down, I really hate myself. But when modded properly, survival mode of Fallout 4 is really, really fun and scratches an itch that very few other games have ever been able to. Which is a shame because I think Fallout 4 was a big departure for the series and kind of a downgrade in a lot of ways. And you know what, I decided I'm not going to rant about the bad parts of Fallout 4. When it comes to the internet, I think negative game reviews are kind of a saturated market at this point. And as much as my cynical self hates to admit it, there is something to being positive about things. Now don't get me wrong, you can be critical of a video game, please do. If they make boneheaded decisions, you need to do that to keep them accountable and to make sure other people are warned off the game if it turns out to be really bad. And if you're one of the kinds of people who really like those angry video game reviews where people scream a lot, I don't know what to tell you. I was one of you and I really enjoyed those things, but over time I realized just being a little bit more positive makes me a lot happier as a person. But I'm not your therapist, and you can do whatever you want. If you find more fulfillment in doing that, go ahead, but that's just how I work. For me, being angry, cynical, and loud was fun for a little bit, but suffered from the law of diminishing returns. I mean, there's plenty of YouTubers I still watch who fall into that category I was talking about, that I still watch and I still really love. But the older I get, the less willing I am to just be needlessly negative about things, because it can be pretty draining in the long run. But while we're on the topic, I might as well talk about some of the criticisms I have for Fallout 4. For me, the big ones were the dialogue menu, the lack of player agency, and the change in art style, at least a little bit. There's more, but that's the only thing that springs to mind immediately. I know I talk about some of the criticisms I have for Fallout 4 in the earlier parts of this video, and during my videos I'm definitely going to be not shy about talking about the things I dislike, but I want to set everybody's expectations accordingly because I don't want to be the guy who has to scream about things when the truth is I don't feel really that strongly about it in the first place. And for all the negative things I can say about Fallout 4, I still have played a lot of hours of it. So it must be doing something right. Because the older I get, the harder it is to enjoy video games, at least it seems that way. So when I finally find a video game that I can latch onto and really enjoy, it's kind of a rare treat for me. And despite its flaws, Fallout 4 has kind of made it onto that list, whereas other video games which are much more popular have completely passed me by. But if you're watching this and you think, hey, he might enjoy this video game I play, feel free to recommend it to me then, because if I actually enjoy it and have a lot of interesting thoughts, I might just share them in a video. But this video is supposed to be about Fallout 4 survival, so let's get back to talking about it for a little bit. Which is kind of difficult because this video game's been out for a while, so everything there is to say has mostly been said. But hey, I like the raiders in this game. They have a lot more personality than the last ones. They don't have the blank, weird, staring faces like in Fallout 3. But sometimes it seems like the raiders in this game have a lot more personality. At least sometimes, because they can get pretty old. And while I don't have any footage of it, you can look up raider banter from Fallout 4, and there's some pretty good little bits of writing in there. Which makes fighting them a lot more interesting since they act a lot more like real people, even though their AI can be...
Only a fucking coward hides!
See what I mean? That's a lot more interesting to hear that in a gunfight. Though I'm sad to say that's one of the few improvements made with raiders in Fallout 4. But to give credit where it's due, they did do a good job with them, at least better than they did before. But I do miss the enemy varieties in the other Fallout games. While Fallout 3 was a little sparse, Fallout New Vegas did a lot more weird stuff with the different factions and whatnot. And honestly, the world just doesn't feel as alive because the characters in the different factions don't seem to exist apart from the small areas where they're confined to. That or a few other random encounters including them. Which, I might be getting a little nitpicky, so let's scale back and talk about mods, because mods would be able to fix that. Another mod that's really cool that I don't have installed here, but I have some pictures, is Subway Runner by user GhostFC3S. This mod connects all of the subways under Boston into one large area that you can explore and be able to travel across the map without having to use the normal pathways. Which was very useful to me because in my original survival playthrough, I added so many mods which ramped up the difficulty that traveling through downtown was either too laggy or too dangerous. Now, I appreciate the fact that while I've been talking about how difficult this game can be, the gameplay probably hasn't been looking too difficult that you're seeing here, but that's partially because I'm a higher level and have some pretty modded out weapons and kit. But in survival mode, this game's a lot more difficult, especially early on, like I said before. And if you really hate yourself, you can get mods to make the game even more punishing if you really do dislike yourself that much. But most of the time when I get mods, it's in order to increase the atmosphere, get me more immersed. Speaking of which, this is True Storms by user Fading Signal. This mod overhauls the weather system in Fallout 4 and adds new storm types and other weather conditions. While there is other weather mods out there for Fallout 4, this one's one of my favorites and easily belongs in the category of mod gold because it really enhances the atmosphere, and as I said before, that's a pretty big deal for me. I might be overblowing it because while it's an awesome mod, I am kind of the target audience since I really love the rain. And I mean it. Anytime it rains, it puts me in a good mood. Other than that, the variety just really helps the game stand out and look more interesting and makes for some pretty memorable moments. I honestly think that video games need to spend more time with their weather systems than they do already. Some games do them pretty well, some of them don't. And I think this mod does them really well. Going through the city normally can be intense in survival mode, but during a sandstorm, it changes it a lot, especially if you don't know the area very well. This moment right here stands out to me since I was kind of lost downtown and having to survive, and I didn't want to lose any of the loot I got while scavenging down here. Well, I gotta be completely honest with you guys, I'm running out of things to talk about. Truth is, this video was supposed to be a lot longer than it is now, but now that I'm here, I just don't have as much to say. So, I'm gonna show off this last little settlement that I was working on, and then talk about my final thoughts on Fallout 4, at least for now. This is my favorite settlement, Vault 88. I have a lot of other ones I've worked on, but not as much as this one. This area and how it fits in with my survival build is one of the big reasons that I love this game so much, or at least it's a microcosm of it. See, gameplay aside and story aside, I just love the Fallout universe. Its style, its music, its atmosphere, those are all much more important to me than the story, and I know I'm probably alone on that, but if this universe fits and looks right and feels right, I can't complain much. Don't get me wrong, I really appreciate Fallout's story, and when done well, it's some of my favorite storytelling in video games. But the thing that's kept me glued to this series is honestly just its style and charm, and while Fallout 4 is kind of lacking in the charm department, it can be made up for with a lot of these mods and a lot of the heart the community has behind it. And to date, the only Fallout game I haven't played is 76, and a lot of people have been telling me I need to try it. But the truth is, I don't think anything's more antithetical to immersion than multiplayer gaming. But I'm willing to give it a shot. If it turns out to be good, maybe I'll make a video on it. I know they've been working on it for a while, and while it's not my ideal Fallout experience, it might be enough to hold me over just because I love the universe so much. Or maybe I'll hate it completely and never want to play it again. Who knows? I've kind of had my Fallout fix for now. I really enjoyed Fallout 4, and if I really wanted to play something new, I'd just try 76, or wanted to be a bit more confident about what I'd enjoy, I'd try out Fallout 4 New Vegas or Fallout Miami. Hey, look at this. Sim Settlements allows you to make indoor little shops and settlements like this, so you can actually see a lot of this stuff and helps you to really customize your vault in a way that I don't think you can do otherwise. So keep in mind when you see a lot of these decorations, credit to Sim Settlements because I could not do it myself. Which brings me to another point. The community is one of the reasons I can still play this game and actually enjoy it because the level of dedication through mods and everything else is amazing. You gotta think, these modders, a lot of them are just people doing passion projects and programming this because they really enjoy the game and want to make it better. And that added to the shelf life of this game and gave it a lot more longevity than it would have had otherwise. Bethesda kind of owes their fans pretty big, more than a lot of other game developers, I think. But I gotta give Bethesda credit, putting these mods on the console and letting people play and do what they want freely is really cool, and I hope other game developers follow suit. Especially on consoles. It really adds a lot. Fallout's a much bigger franchise than it was when I first got into it, and they're making a TV show. We'll have to see how that turns out. And at the risk of sounding like an elitist, I really hope the next few Fallout games don't pander to a wider audience and dumb down the experience. But if they do, at least keep the door open for fans to be able to mod it and fix it and play the game exactly how they want. That's one of the reasons, probably the only reason, I can still play this game and love it as much as I do. And while you still get flops like Fallout the Frontier, the modding community is so vibrant and so alive and so dedicated that it's really inspiring to me as somebody who really likes artistry and video games. By the way, this video has been on for almost 35 minutes, so I'm gonna wrap it up. So, Fallout 4. A lot of people had mixed feelings on this, and I'm one of them. But if you like the universe and maybe the game just felt a little too bland for you by itself, try playing survival mode and experimenting with some mods. It can actually add a whole lot more into the game than you might be anticipating. And there we have it. All the thoughts I can conjure up right now for Fallout 4 Survival. I'm actually a little burnt out on it for now, so I'm happy to go back and play some other games. And hey, thanks for watching this video. It's a little bit long, but you stuck through it. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of us. And hey, even if I don't get more than... Hey look, I got one more subscriber! I don't know if they came back or if somebody else found it. Well, anyway, I'm not an editor, but I love editing, and I really enjoy video games, and I don't know when to shut up, so this is a pretty good hobby that mixes all of those things together. And you know what? Nothing will probably come of this, but I enjoyed the time we had together. And hey, if you did too, you should tune in next time I have something to talk about. Not a lot of people want to listen to me jabber on in real life, but I still have strangers on YouTube and the rest of the internet. And I just realized how depressing that was once I said it out loud.